One segment of small town architecture that I've always liked are ice cream huts or shops. I'm really not sure what they're called, since they're usually referred to by proper nouns or names, such as the ones in this video. To me, they represent the lowest common denominator in American pop retro culture, and I really mean that in a good way. The tackier and older the structure, the more appeal it has. Say if Robert Frank and Andy Warhol were architects, they might come up with these. I wanted a certain look and feel to these images. It's the beginning of spring, but it's still only around 20 degrees Fahrenheit, so I wanted an abandoned, kind of lonely look. I initially decided to shoot with my Zero Image 2000 pinhole camera. If you've seen any of the previous videos, you know that I've used this camera before. It's a pinhole camera, meaning there's no lens. It's well crafted, made of teak and brass, so it's very sturdy, but it's very quirky too, which I'll get into later. To set the exposure, you need to use a light meter or DSLR to determine what the exposure is. I'm using Ilford HP4 120 film at ISO 125. So set up your DSLR or light meter for the ISO, pick a shutter speed, like 125, and take a reading. Let's say your meter says f5.6. There's a convenient dial on back of the Zero Image pinhole camera that tells you the correct exposure. The f-stop of this camera is 138, so find that and look at the exposure time. In this case, it's 4 seconds. I'm also using a Canon 5D Mark I DSLR. I just got this as a backup for my 5D Mark III. I wanted another full-frame DSLR, and this seemed to be the most inexpensive, efficient route to go. It's rugged, professional, and very reasonable. I've read that the 5D Mark I takes very filmic-like images. This is my first time using it, so I guess I'll find out. Here's our first stop at the Dario. It's cold out as you can see, but nice and clear. It's a little after sunrise, and the sunlight is low and bright in the horizon. To use a pinhole camera, you have to have a tripod and a cable release. You can expose the pinhole by hand, but I like the stability of a cable release. Okay, here's the first shot. Winding the film from exposure to exposure is a challenge on the pinhole camera, since the indicator is hard to see through the little red window. You need to keep it in direct sunlight to see the exposure number. Here's the next shot. If you're familiar with the zone system, keep it in mind when you measure the light. Spot expose for middle gray if you can, right around the Dario sign in this case. This will really help bring out the deep blacks and crisp whites in post-processing. Here's a little bit of homespun art that you see on tons of these places. I think it's kind of cool. I like to look for text, messages, and menus on these places. When you find them, they usually make for pretty decent photographs. This is our next stop, the D&N Dairy Bar. There's a big frozen custard sign facing the main street. The light's pretty much the same, so the exposure will stay the same. Okay, I'm getting ready to take another frontal exposure. The pinhole camera is pretty easy to use. You just line it up for the shot you want to get, a little bit of guesswork, and hold the cable release for the exposure time, and that's it. Again, the hardest part is having to look in that little red window and advance to the next exposure frame. Okay, this is our third and last stop, and this is a dairy park. This is really an old one. The sun, as you can see, is still really low in the horizon, so we still got some pretty good shooting time left. And what's nice about this is it's very high contrast. It's early Sunday morning, not much traffic around, no cars, so it's going to work out pretty good. Again, just take a look at it, set it up, Click for the exposure time and you're done. I ran into a problem here. Just finished the 12th exposure, the entire roll, and the film wouldn't rewind. It was just really tight and it jammed up. The problem was you just have to loosen the back a little bit and it'll float right in. Here are the photographs taken with a zero image 2000 pinhole camera. Again, I use Ilford HP4 at ISO 125 and I developed it in Ilfosol 3 for 4.5 minutes. Here are the images taken with the Canon 5D Mark I. The ISO was set to 100 and I used spot metering in order to utilize the zone system in post-processing. As I mentioned before, I read that the Canon 5D Mark I is supposed to take very filmic-like images. After shooting with this for my first time, I tend to believe that that's true. Thanks for watching, and if you like these videos, please hit the subscribe button below. This is Jeff, and I'll see you soon.